Good evening, everyone. The May 9th, 2024 meeting of the Brisbane Planning Commission will now come to order. May I please have a roll call?
Commissioner Funka? Aye. Commissioner Lau?
Present.
Here.
Here.
I'll let the record show Commissioner Gooding is absent.
Thank you. Thank you. May I ask for a motion to adopt the agenda?
I'll make a motion.
Thank you.
I'll second.
Great. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Commissioner Funk, did you said aye? Sorry. Aye. Oh.
Aye.
The motion passes with 4 ayes. Moving on to the consent calendar. Can ask the public if they would like to pull any item from the consent calendar. If they would like to, they can notify us by either Zoom or by calling the numbers that are listed above. In the meantime, do any of the commissioners like to remove any item from the consent calendar?
No.
Thank you.
Ten seconds. $30 has elapsed and no one has raised their hand.
All right, thank you. May I have a motion to adopt the consent calendar as presented?
I'll make a motion.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And the motion passes with 4 ayes. Moving on to oral communications. Is there anyone who wishes to address the commission for items that aren't on tonight's agenda? They can contact us through the numbers listed or by Zoom. Well, we're
15 seconds.
thanks.
$60 has elapsed and no one has raised their hand.
Great, thank you. Regarding written communications, there was I acknowledge a written communication received regarding the 70 Old County Road versus the housing planning in Crocker Park and Sierra Point. Staff, were there any additional communications received?
Just to clarify, the communication that you have from Dana Dilworth,
Yes.
her first line starts with that, but it's I believe that's a broader implication regarding the both items that are on the agenda tonight.
Yes, acknowledged, thank you. Were there any additional communications received? That's no, thank you. We can move on to old and new business. We'll start with the zoning text and map amendment 2024-RZ-1, R-1 residential district, and the R-PUO BA Brisbane Acres Residential District in entirety. A recommendation to City Council on zoning text and map amendment 2024-RZ-1, amending regulations within Title 16 and 17 of the Brisbane Municipal Code to add the R-TUO Residential 2-Unit Overlay District as new Chapter 17.05 and related amendments, and finding that this project is exempt from environment review under CEQA Guidelines Sections 15061B1 and 3, Section 15183. City of Brisbane is the applicant.
Bear with staff a moment while we pull up a PowerPoint.
Thank you.
It's not showing up here.
No.
No.
So I'll start in talking and we'll catch up with the PowerPoint.
Wonderful, thank you.
Moment. So this first zoning amendment on the agenda for tonight is to amend the zoning text provisions and zoning map to add Chapter 1705 to the Brisbane Municipal Code, establishing an overlay zoning district for urban lot splits and two-unit developments within the single-family residential districts. It also includes updates to related provisions, both in Title 16 and 17. So I'll provide a brief background and an outline of the sections of the code that are affected. Then I'll go over the key provisions in the draft ordinance and then take any questions the commission may have, and then we can open it up for the public hearing portion. By way of background, California Senate Bill SB 9 was signed by the governor in 2021. Oh, we're up, okay. And that became effective at the start of 2022 and codified in the government sections that you see on your screen. These codes require jurisdictions statewide to permit two-unit primary dwellings in the single-family residential zoning districts on lots where one single-family dwelling would normally be permitted, or for single-family lots to be split into two lots. Since the government code is already in effect, property owners may invoke the provisions of SB 9 absent a city ordinance. However, the housing element, which council adopted last year, includes a program for Brisbane to update its zoning ordinance to implement SB 9. Program 2A6 from the housing element commits the city to adopting an implementing ordinance. And note that state law also allows that jurisdictions adopt objective standards through local ordinance, so long as they don't preclude developments that would otherwise comply with SB 9. Since the housing element was adopted, the Planning Commission has had 4 workshops to discuss the implications of the provisions of the draft ordinance. Jeremiah, do you mind forwarding? Once I see. Thanks. As provided in your agenda report, the municipal code chapters and sections shown here are included in the proposed amendments. At the core is to add a new chapter 17.05 and the corresponding map amendment, which would establish a residential 2-unit overlay district over the R1 and RBA single-family zoning districts. Those code sections are highlighted in yellow here on the screen. The others in white are essentially supporting amendments and include a cross-reference in Title 16 for urban lot splits and some updates in the definitions provided in Chapter 1702, and then establishing a new district, essentially naming it in 1704. Next, I'll highlight some key takeaways in the draft ordinance. This slide provides a partial list of the definitions that would be amended through this ordinance and include definitions within Chapter 1702, which have citywide applicability, and then the definitions within 1705-030, those are specific to the 2-unit overlay district. Based on Planning Commission feedback, staff has added the draft clause to driveway definition, which would allow for shared driveways without a variance, and that would apply beyond the overlay district. As a cleanup item, the definition of duplex would be moved to be within the definition of dwelling. Definition of dwelling is essentially a long list of the various types of dwelling units. Primary and main dwelling unit would also be added under the dwelling unit definition, and main dwelling is currently defined in the city's ADU ordinance, and primary dwelling is a term used by the state in SB 9, and they both have the same meaning. 2-unit development and urban lot split is defined within the proposed new chapter consistent with state law. These two definitions are at the core of the draft ordinance and SB 9, in that SB 9 allows for 2 primary units on an existing lot of record, or as an alternative, the lot may be split and up to 2 primary units may be located on each of the 2 resultant lots. Accessory dwelling units, ADUs, or junior accessory dwelling units may also be permitted, but the total number of units for primary units, ADUs, JADUs, cannot exceed 4 for the original lot area. So regardless if it's a lot split or if it stays as a single lot, the total number cannot exceed 4. Section 1705-040 and 050 in the draft ordinance outline a number of criteria for eligibility. The language provided in this list is condensed but still a bit lengthy, so I won't read all this. A few highlights are that the eligible lots must be lots of record within the R1 or RBA single-family districts. May not be a lot that has habitat for protection of butterfly species, such as might be found on some upper lots in Brisbane Acres. For urban lot splits, the owner or immediate family must sign an affidavit that they intend to live on the property for 3 years or more. The development is not to displace families from deed-restricted affordable units or to displace tenants. Again, in brief, the overlay district allows for duplex dwellings and dwelling groups of 2 primary units on a lot, whereas the existing zoning and a single-family dwelling would only be permitted on primary, and existing would only permit single-family dwellings or ADUs or JADUs. And that's subject to Chapter 1743. This map shows the areas affected. Essentially, it's hatched over the R1 and RBA are the only districts subject to 1705. We can refer back to that if needed. So this table is an excerpt from the draft ordinance and shows the potential development scenarios without a lot split. Currently, under the existing R1 or RBA zoning, a single-family dwelling may be developed on a lot of record, so the ordinance would not need to be invoked for such developments, so they're shown as NA here, but we wanted to show them for completeness. Using the overlay, 2 primary units may be developed as attached or detached on a lot, along with either ADUs or a JADU. And the JADU may be associated only with one of the primary detached units if it's a dwelling group. And that's essentially tied to the definition within the ADU ordinance, and won't get into that unless you have questions on that. The main takeaway is that no more than 2 primary units and no more than 4 total units may be developed. And then prior to SB 9, the total could have been 3. It could have been a single-family dwelling plus a ADU plus a JADU. So the potential increase is 1 unit. Some additional development standards without a lot split are that each primary unit must be allowed to be 800 square feet, and lot coverage limits cannot be used to preclude such development. Side and rear setbacks may be as close as 4 feet per state law, but as an objective standard, the building height within that setback area may not exceed 25 feet, and that's something that we talked about in the workshops before, so that's something the city has added. Also, since design permits would no longer apply to ridgeline lots with the overlay, that 25-foot limit would also apply on ridgeline lots. That height matches the state's required allowance currently for ADUs. And finally, the commission had a fairly detailed discussion on parking, and due to concerns about use of garages for other purposes besides parking, garages may be allowed as extra parking beyond the minimum. The required space would still need to be met with uncovered parking or carport parking. Shared driveways would also be allowed under the ordinance. Moving on to urban lot splits, there are a number of requirements to create a second lot under the ordinance. And first, and I'll have to use my glasses, I didn't, and hopefully I can read it here. So first is no more than 2 legal lots of approximately of equal size. So that's in the range of 40-60 ratio or 50-50 ratio, in that range. They can't be lots of smaller than 1,200 square feet. Dimension minimums shall not apply, except it has to meet that 1,200 square foot minimum. Flag lots may be approved. They need to have access to the public right-of-way. They can't be further subdivided after the fact. And yeah, essentially that number 8 is kind of a repeat of the same, and you can't act in concert with another property owner developing lots. Moving on to potential development with an urban lot split, this table on the next one, which are excerpted out of the ordinance, are intended to be used together. So this one shows the potential development on just one of the 2 lots. And then we go to the next table and essentially combine that. So on the x-axis is resultant lot 1, and the y-axis is lot 2, resultant lot 2. And so if you essentially you can line up the different types and come up with the total. So somebody could, not sure why they would, but they could combine 2 lot type A's in an urban lot split situation to just have 2 units, or they could say combine a lot type I with a lot type A for up to 4 units. And so it's taking that first table and combining them here and showing the different scenarios there. On other standards for urban lot splits, all the same standards applicable to without a lot split would also apply, including floor area allowance, lot coverage, exception, setbacks, heights. heights within the setback and parking. Short-term rentals would be prohibited on any lot created by urban lot splits. And I should add that there are other provisions in the short-term rental ordinance that would limit the potential for short-term rentals even without a lot split. Okay. Some additional provisions to note: any development under the ordinance with or without a lot split would require a building permit and deed restrictions along with that. Condominiums may be established consistent with the existing ordinance on condos. The city may deny a 2-unit housing development based on evidence of adverse impact to health and safety standards. And again, there are a number of qualifying criteria for eligibility, as I mentioned at the start. And so with that, and finally, staff recommends adoption, or recommends that the Planning Commission provide a recommendation to City Council for adoption of zoning text and map amendment 2024 RZ1. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Thank you. I have a question, but I'll wait to ask it later. I'd like to ask if any of the commissioners have any questions for staff. Commissioner Funka?
I do not at this time.
Commissioner Saiza?
Well, I was going to ask about the impact of the recent court ruling, but should we go to the next item before we discuss that?
I think it's fine. I could discuss it now.
Okay, so, so this ruling by the LA Superior Court has ruled that SB 9 is unconstitutional, and he may issue a ruling next month that says it could apply to the entire state. So, the concern is, do we do anything now or do we wait for that ruling? Because, a potential outcome could be that he makes that ruling and he suspends the law. And if we were to pass it and, we made this local decision to pass it, then it wouldn't apply to us if that law is now held in suspension, and the Attorney General might appeal that. And while we wait for a final outcome, who knows if the law gets overturned, so.
I think there were some comments from the city legal counsel. You may recall, or maybe you don't recall, that the particular action, the lawsuit, was a charter city, several charter cities in Southern California. And that's the only place it applies. City of Brisbane is a general law city, so even if that decision were upheld, it would not apply to general law cities. So that would have to be some other sort of legislative recourse or some other litigation. So there really is no direct bearing on the outcome of this case as it would apply to a general law city like Brisbane.
Okay, so there would be no negatives to going ahead with this that the city attorney can see?
No, and I guess if the law were to change down the road in response to this, the city can always repeal our locally adopted ordinance to be consistent with the state. So just because we adopt it, if state law changes, we have the ability to modify our own local regulations accordingly.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Patel, did you have any questions?
But if it, sorry, just quickly so I understand, let's assume that SB 9 becomes optional, let's say, because what the constitutional issue was is you can't force these charter cities to make these changes, and so they don't have to repeal SB 9, right? In order, it may not be a valid law, and
They're not subject to SB 9, correct?
right, and And it may also be that it applies to everybody.
There's no court, that is not part of the court action. So we can all speculate about what it would or wouldn't do, but that's not on the table before the court presently, or as part of that action. It has no application to general law cities.
Right, and assuming that SB 9, let's say SB 9 becomes optional, would we still then revisit this at that point?
Yes, if general law cities are not subject to SB 9, and the city's policy is not to subject ourselves to it, yeah, we'd have the ability to revisit that.
Thank you. Yeah, that was my question too. Appreciate the response and the reply. If there are any further questions for staff, I'd like to open up the public hearing.
I just have some questions.
sorry.
I don't know if staff's read this letter from Ms. Dilworth. I didn't really understand it, and I didn't know if there was anything that we needed to sort of address in terms of her concerns.
I think staff did read through it. I don't know that it's up to the commission if there's anything in this letter that strikes you that's worth discussion.
I mean, is the
To
analysis
note that,
basically,
that
is the analysis basically like, okay, these things do matter, we do care about the environment and how all of these things are going to relate, but really SB 9 doesn't allow us to change how we would actually move forward. Is that basically the analysis?
correct, yeah.
Okay.
SB 9 is really already effective. We
Yeah.
we have at least one application. I don't know if it's submitted, I believe so. So there's already activity anyhow on SB 9 with or without a city ordinance. So this puts a little bit more control in the city's hands.
The thing that, I mean, perhaps we could address is just the factual matter. It was in the sentence that says, where are other city commissions and committees weighing in on quadrupling requirements for the areas of concern? I don't know if the math there is right. It doesn't seem like a quadrupling to me. It sounds like a lot, but I don't think that is factually correct. But I certainly understand where the overall sentiment comes from in the letter.
Thank you. Do recognize the communication from Dana Dilworth and her comments and very valid points that were brought up. Thank you. If there aren't any other further questions for the staff, then can we open this for the public hearing? For the public, if they wish to contact us with the numbers listed or by Zoom.
Should we state that?
How long of a period do you want to open for the public hearing?
It's a standard 2 minutes. Thank you.
Can I ask a question while we're waiting?
Of course.
think that sometimes people in town get annoyed or angry because they don't know things are going to happen. For example, like when a lot split's going to happen, or when someone's going to develop 2 units on a lot split. Is there any mechanism to let neighbors know when like a lot split is happening and 2 properties are going to be built on it? Is that something we do, or is that something we don't do?
It's ministerial.
Is there some type of local notice that's provided?
We certainly have a precedent with, you may recall, we had to adopt some procedures for what essentially is functionally design review of multifamily that was ministerial based on objective development standards. And again, we do provide notice to people, but it's not a discretionary action. So yeah, we could certainly provide a notice, but again, the understanding it's not necessarily appealable. There's not going to be a hearing on it, but it would be strictly a notification procedure.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, I
that could be done.
Right, just like, because then there's going to be construction on their street, maybe they just want to prepare for it, and they're just, people become less angry.
Yeah.
Maybe,
Yeah, we can,
less angry.
we can make that happen.
Thank you.
2 minutes has elapsed and no one has raised their hand.
There haven't been any requests from the public. Can I ask for a motion to close the public hearing?
I move to close a public hearing.
Great.
I'll second.
Thanks. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. The motion passes with 4 ayes. In the deliberation process period, start down the line. Commissioner Patel, are there any?
I would say that I think that there's probably a lot of people in town that don't like SB9, and that's like a whole different debate than what we're here to really talk about, which is the fact that we've gone through all of these sort of study sessions and talked about all the things that we do have control over, and we've tried to make those sort of modifications in what we, we've tried to make the modifications the best that we can to sort of comply with SB9. So I think this is the best we can do. I mean, I do understand people's annoyance at SB9, but that's not really why we're here today, is my position on it, I think.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, it's trying to make it as palatable as possible. Commissioner Sayasan, any?
No, I agree. I think we did as best as we could with all the workshops, but pretty much our hands are tied, and I think we try to incorporate as much as of the public input, and I think staff did a great job of putting everything together. So it is what it is. So, but I do like Commissioner Patel's suggestion. So is that something that we can actually state as a policy to notify neighbors if there's going to be a lot split?
I think with the commission's, you want to make that a specific recommendation, where you recommend to the
Yes.
council that we include a notification procedure for lot splits? And
Yes.
you could embed that into the motion if that's the way you end up heading this evening.
Okay.
Thank you. Commissioner Funke?
Just out of curiosity, it came up in discussions before. When you do a lot split, does the nature of the split, is it pre-specified? You had that table with the A to I. When you do the split, do you say ahead of time it's going to be this way? 2 to 2 or 3 to 1, something like that? Is that? I wonder how that's conveyed when you do it.
So up front, they would need to effectuate the parcel map to split the 2 lots, and I'm thinking that they would need to have some sort of sense of a development plan in place to to actually know what would be suitable on the lot is, but-
Yeah,
but I could see that it could be phased in over time.
And it could also change, right? So you could have a lot split with two single-family houses and then get sold or whatever, and then someone wants an ADU or a junior ADU, and based on what they're allowed on which lot it is, they'll still be able to expand it. So ultimately, it could go up to 4, even though it starts off as 2.
Right, as long as any future development still fits within the limits of the ordinance. So,
In a way, I think we always have a concept, or someone could show something, but it's going to be kind of up to the buyer and the seller, because obviously, if one of the lots has already been consumed by a number of the total, well, that prospective buyer of the second parcel would not be able to achieve that. They're not going to get 3 if the first lot has 3 lots, right? So that'll be a challenge. That'll all be ultimately checked through the building permit process, because that's really our main control, right? People can show whatever they want to show on a map, but the permitting will have to comply with the requirements, and frankly, it's the first person in will drive the boat in terms of how that distribution ends up.
But they'll be sort of linked historically
Yes, yeah.
from then onwards.
You
Yeah,
cannot
okay.
serially just pretend that was created separately. It was created through this process and has limitations because it was created through this process.
So if this is a hypothetical, right? Just for fun. If you do a lot split, if a person does a lot split and they sell it and they keep their single family home, and then another person buys the lot that was split and they develop it into a single family house, and then they eventually add an ADU, and then they eventually add a junior ADU, right? They can do all of that. But then the first person would be out of luck, and they can no longer add any ADUs or junior ADUs, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, unless when they do the lot split and they sell, there's something in the sale that says you can only, right? They can put a restriction.
That'd be a
Okay.
private matter between
Okay,
between the buyer and the seller, certainly. City would not enforce that kind of private agreement.
but if someone overlooks it and then the buyer builds 3 units, then that person is out of luck. Okay.
So build all your ADUs before you split your lot. Got it.
Does the city have any sense of what the uptake will be, or any sort of survey about how many lots might be eligible? Any projections like that?
We do not at this time. The law has been in effect for a couple of years now, and we've had some interest. People do pay attention to state laws that come through for housing, and so there's been some interest, but none that I know of that actually have been completed yet.
One in process?
One in process, I think. So, yeah, there are enough restrictions on it. It's not every lot by any means that even would be eligible. And then you are becoming deed restricted on that. And so there's some downsides.
Yeah.
I can make the motion if
Yep.
everyone's okay.
Yep.
I would move to approve zoning text and map amendment 2024-RZ-1.
Did you wanted to add your,
And I would make a motion that we add the link, we add the notice requirement, so that neighbors are notified when a project is approved.
I'll second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I
Aye.
That motion passes with 4 ayes. with that, anyone may appeal the action of the Planning Commission to the City Council, except where specified otherwise. Appeals shall be filed with the city clerk not later than 15 calendar days following the Planning Commission's decision. Exceptions to the 15-day filing period include the following. Appeals shall be filed with the city clerk within 6 calendar days of the Planning Commission's action for use permits and variances, and 10 calendar days for tentative maps and advertising sign applications. An application form and fee is required to make a formal appeal. For additional information, please contact the city clerk at 415-508-2110. Thanks. And then we can move on to the second item, which is zoning text amendment 2024-RZ-2, citywide. Recommendation to City Council on omnibus zoning amendments to modify the development standards for multifamily and residential mixed-use zoning districts consistent with California State Bill SB 478, the Housing Opportunity Act, and as provided in the 2023 to 2031 housing element for building heights, lot coverage, and floor area ratios, and related amendments, including but not limited to organizational amendments and amendments to development regulation exceptions and zoning administrator procedures. And finding that this project is exempt from environment review under CEQA Guidelines Sections 15061B3, Section 15183, City of Brisbane, applicant. Staff, presentation, please.
Thank you. The Planning Commission held 4 workshops between June of 2023 and just this last February on the pair of ordinances, SB 9, which we just covered, and then this omnibus to address certain housing element programs, and California SB 478. The housing element was approved by City Council last May, and SB 478 was signed into state law in 2021. Became effective early 2022. For this item, I'll provide a brief background, and I'll highlight key amendments that are proposed with this draft ordinance. And then we'll open it up for questions and then open the public hearing. So briefly, by way of background, California Senate Bill SB 478 passed in 2021, as I mentioned, and became effective early 2022. It places requirements on the minimum development standards that a city can impose on multifamily developments. This is aimed at increasing residential density, specifically missing middle infill housing, to help address statewide housing shortages, and includes several requirements that are outlined here on your slide. And I won't go over all those, but you can see them here on the slide. In addition to addressing SB 478, the proposed amendments in this draft ordinance would be to address the housing element goals of facilitating and supporting the production of housing at all income levels, and removing unreasonable government constraints to the provision of housing. There are a few policies and programs that fall under these goals. That includes the programs of raising the height limit in multifamily districts to 36 feet, where it now ranges between 28 feet up to 35 feet. Implementing zoning ordinances that would help streamline approvals of projects that meet the city's housing goals, and providing for reasonable accommodation for people with disabilities. The Planning Commission held workshops on the preliminary amendments and expressed a desire to allow that 36-foot height limit across not just the districts that allow for multifamily development, but to the single-family districts as well, to provide for equity between those neighboring properties. This slide provides both an outline of the various chapters or individual sections that are included in the ordinance. And my presentation also follows this order, so we'll briefly touch on definitions, then amendments to the district development regulations, then exceptions to those development regulations, and the exceptions are citywide. Finally is procedures and administration. It's reorganized slightly from what you saw in your agenda report, in that exceptions is pulled out from where it currently falls in order in the code, and that will become a new chapter. And we'll go over that further in a moment. So now we'll go over the ordinance highlights that are further described in the agenda report. Very briefly, the draft ordinance includes an update to the definitions to include outside walls under a broader definition of wall. This is applicable to articulation requirements. It's essentially an update for clarity that came to light in staff's review of the development regulations. The next group of amendments are those that would update the district development regulations to address SB 478 and the housing element program on height, and also reorganization for clarity. And very briefly, and we can refer back to this if needed, it shows the citywide zoning districts. The districts that are specifically addressed in the next few slides are the residential and mixed-use districts in Central Brisbane, Brisbane Acres, Southwest Bayshore, and to a lesser degree, Parkside overlay districts, which are at the edge of Crocker Park, and essentially makes up most of the southern portion of the city except Sierra Point and Southeast Bayshore. So the exceptions and the application processing procedures would apply citywide. The proposed development regulation updates are broken down to two slides. This first one here highlights the proposed amendments to the residential districts and residential overlay districts. The development regulations section for each of the 4 R districts has been reorganized for ease of use. The 36-foot height limit would be applied to each of the R districts. The Parkside overlay districts already allow for higher building heights, so that didn't have to be touched. Multifamily district floor area ratios would be increased to 1.25, while the single-family districts would remain at 0.72. As a reminder, the FAR, floor area ratio, is just that ratio of the building floor area, all floors, relative to lot size. The maximum lot coverage for multifamily districts may be exceeded if needed to achieve the allowed FAR for multifamily of 3 units or more, but not for single family or duplex. Per SB 478, there would be no requirement for the lot of area for a lot of record for multifamily developments of 3 units or more. Finally, there are a couple other amendments proposed. One for an organizational cleanup of the ridgeline development provisions in the RBA, and another to allow for ZA, zoning administrator, decisions on fences, and that's cross-referenced in a section to follow on the fence exceptions. We'll go over in a moment. This slide highlights the proposed amendments to the 2 mixed-use districts that allow for residential uses, including multifamily dwellings. Just like the residential districts on the previous slide, the mixed-use districts would have an increase in the height limits. In this case, it's pretty nominal increase from 35 feet to 36 feet for both downtown Brisbane and Southwest Bayshore. And likewise, per SB 478, existing lots of record would be considered conforming for size. Then in downtown Brisbane, there's an amendment proposed to the fence provision for greater flexibility on the height, but rather than planning director approval, fence applications go to the zoning and administrator, and so there's a cross-reference to the fence regulations that's proposed in the update. The next topic area is the exceptions to the development regulations. Those are currently provided in several sections within the General Use Regulations chapter and would be relocated to a new chapter to be titled Exceptions to District Development Regulations. And a number of amendments to the existing regulations would be provided within that chapter. This slide provides a brief outline of the sections proposed in Chapter 1747, the exceptions chapter. First, the exceptions pertaining to lots have been updated in Section 030 to include a reference to urban lot splits, which we just discussed. Section 040 on height exceptions has been updated to a table format, and a couple consistency changes have been included, such as church steeples, radio towers, flagpoles. Section 050A on setback exceptions has been reorganized, and some amendments have been included, as noted here on the slide. 050 on fences, hedges, and walls has also been reorganized into a table format and updated. 060 on exception modification procedures has been updated with a cross-reference to the updated zoning administrator chapter, which will follow in a moment. And finally, Section 070, request for reasonable accommodation would become an administrative approval rather than a zoning administrator approval. So this would be a building permit process if they meet the criteria. And this final group of sections will cover the procedures and administration contained in Section 1742.070 on design permit amendments, Chapter 1746 on variances, 1752 on appeals, and 1756 on administration, which is being renamed to zoning administrator. Regarding design permit modifications sections, it would be renamed more generally to modifications instead of minor modifications, and then cross-reference the updated section 1756.090. Then chapter 1746 would be amended to remove references to the zoning administrator approval, since these types of applications are heard by the Planning Commission, as has been the practice over the years. The appeals chapter in 1752 has been updated and reformatted for clarity. Substantive updates include a new section for appeals of zoning administrator decisions has been added, and those would go to the Planning Commission, which is already the case, but it's more of a clarification of that here in one location. Zoning administrator and planning director decisions would have a 10-day appeal period, and the Planning Commission's appeal period would remain 15 days for most applications, unless specified otherwise in the code. Provision has been added for clarity that if an appeal closing date falls on a weekend or a holiday, then the next business day would be the appeal deadline. And finally, Chapter 1756 would be amended as outlined here. Would it be retitled to zoning administrator to more accurately reflect its contents? The list of application types that the zoning administrator decides on would be updated. It would update and provide more detail on the different types of modifications to planning permits, and those types essentially would be substantial conformance, a minor modification, or major modification. Major modification goes to the original deciding body. Minor modification would be zoning administrator, and substantial conformance essentially is through the building permit process. The procedures for public notice of zoning administrator applications and hearing would be provided, except if superseded elsewhere in Title 17. And finally, it provides for consistency in reporting decisions to the Planning Commission on publicly noticed applications. And that was for a 7-day notice. So in closing, staff recommends that via Resolution 2024 RZ2, the Planning Commission provide a recommendation to City Council of adoption of the zoning text amendment 2024 RZ2. If you have any questions.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Funkin, any questions for staff?
I just have a few, just for clarification. One was there was an exception for lot coverage that was allowed, like, I think now it's 50%, but to meet a certain floor area ratio for units 3 to 7, I can't remember the details, it could be more than 50. Is there any limit on how much more than that? Is there a point at which it becomes like, no, that's too much, or it has to come to the Planning Commission, or is that just totally up to the administrator?
It would be up to the administrator, or the planning director. I should pull the code up. Would be up to him to decide if it could be achieved or not within the floor area. So the lot coverage and floor area are essentially related, and they cannot exceed the 1.25. And so if they can, essentially, they may end up having to go higher to get the lot coverage to fit within the limit while keeping it to the 1.25.
Yeah, or cover more of the lot, potentially, up to 75% or something. Is there a breaking point? I was just curious about that. It seems like there was no outer boundary or something.
I'd say that it's a judgment call, essentially. If for instance, we're seeing high ceiling heights so that they can't go to 3 stories, and trying to claim that, well, we have to push the walls out further and take more lot coverage so we can get the volume. That's just one example I could think of where I don't think it would pass the smell test, if you will, for being able to reasonably allow for that. So essentially, you lower the ceiling heights to 8 feet as standard, and see what you can get in that kind of situation.
Okay. And then one more, and I don't want to take all the oxygen here. So there's the zoning administrators will make many decisions. The Planning Commission is notified like within 7 days before the end of the appeal period. What is the purview of the Planning Commission there? I mean, is there any sort of accountability that the Planning Commission can have a comment on the decisions? I mean, I think part of the purpose here is really to take that out of it and to make this more ministerial and automatic. I completely understand that. But when the Planning Commission is notified, what is their recourse, if any, should they want any?
So we have a provision in there for if 2 of the planning commissioners express that they would like this to be brought up to the Planning Commission, essentially they're appealing it, and there's no fee in that case for appeals. It's just 2 commissioners express concern. We want to bring it to the full commission. It comes to the full commission for review.
Okay, thank you. That's great.
Thank you. Commissioner Saisa?
I don't have any questions.
Commissioner Patel?
No, thank you.
Just a quick question. So views or, with the increase in height, your neighbor, but views aren't protected at all, obviously, right?
Correct.
And was the part of the rationale for increasing the height was to be able to achieve some of those numbers?
Right, so the 36-foot height limit was essentially that came through our review with HCD, with the state to certify the housing element. They expressed concern that they didn't think three-story, they thought that was essentially the threshold to have a viable three-story housing structure. And so that's where it started, and it was applied to multifamily in the housing element. And then per our discussions at the workshops, what we heard was that there was a desire for equity essentially between, say, the R1 district versus the R2 district. So,
Thank you. Thanks for the reminder on that. And then just curious, what is considered a minor review versus a major change that would go to the commission for review? Is like something structural? Is that considered, I imagine, major if there was a change?
I think I'd probably have to look back. There were some specific findings in there for minor versus major, and I think major is essentially where you're changing the overall character, and I'm just going off the top of my head here on this at this point, but you're changing the character, say, of the look of a design permit, and so it needs to go back. Minor might be something that's not necessarily so visible.
I was
I
kind of
could look
wondering
up
the
the
same thing,
findings
whether it's a term
specifically
of
for
art, major versus minor, instead of just like a judgment call. It sounds like it's a term of art, right?
Yeah.
And kind of going back to even the discussion on the first item, so in general, so when there's a permit that's pulled for something like this, are their neighbors notified at all about changes?
So there is a notification procedure in there. Let me go to that section real quick before I
Thanks.
turn.
Thank you. Just if you're gonna build go up to 36 feet.
Yeah. Mini skyscrapers. Mini skyscrapers. No. Someone's gonna be looking into your backyard.
While Ken's looking that up, the permit modifications and what's minor or major, that's all outlined in section 1756090 in terms of what is minor or major, et cetera, what's substantial conformance, if you're interested in looking at that in more detail.
So, page 92 of your packet is the notice procedure and action by the zoning administrator. Administrator shall provide a notice of the application and publish a staff report with a recommended decision to grant or deny the permit at least 10 days prior to the decision on the permit application. It shall be mailed to all owners of properties to and directly across the street from the exterior boundaries of the subject property. If no written public comments are received objecting to the recommended decision by the date of the indicated notice, at least 10 days following the issuance of the notice, the administrator shall act on the application consistent with the recommendation contained in the staff report, and the decision shall become effective immediately at that point. So essentially, it's a notice to the surrounding properties, 10-day notice. And
Great.
if
Thank
there's even one objection, then it goes to a public hearing at that point.
So there could be an objection to the applicant raising the height to 36 feet. That would still go even though they're allowed that provision? I mean,
No, this would be for items that would be subject to the zoning administrator determination. So those different setback exceptions, and there's a list of other items that would be subject to the zoning administrator in that section. But no, the 36-foot height would become essentially conforming with the code, so.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to open up the public hearing for 2 minutes. And if any members of the public wish to contact us by the numbers posted or by Zoom.
The slide just went up to the public now. Thirty seconds. All right, 2 minutes has elapsed and no one has raised their hand.
Great, thank you. Yeah, no public comments. May I have a motion to close the public hearing?
I make a motion to close public hearing.
I'll second.
Great, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes with 4 ayes. Deliberations. Commissioner Patel?
I have nothing.
Commissioner Saison? Commissioner Huck?
None for me either.
Ask for a motion.
I make a motion to adopt staff's recommendation for RZ-2024-2.
I will second.
All in favor?
Aye.
The motion passes with 4 ayes. Anyone may appeal the action of the Planning Commission to the City Council, except where specified otherwise. Appeals shall be filed with the city clerk not later than 15 calendar days following the Planning Commission's decision. Exceptions to the 15-day filing period include the following. Appeals shall be filed with the city clerk within 6 calendar days of the Planning Commission's action for use permits and variances, and 10 calendar days for tentative maps and advertising sign applications. An application form and fee is required to make a formal appeal. For additional information, please contact the city clerk at 415-508-2110. Okay. Thank you. Any items initiated by the staff?
Just a couple quick things. One is you did receive I think a notification of the next county-wide or 21 Elements Planning Commission workshop at the end of May. So again, you're encouraged, invited to attend that if you're available. The registration information is in the paperwork you received already. So that was one thing. Last week, the council did go ahead and authorize or help define what they want to study for the Bank America site planning effort in terms of the scale. There's some question about how broad or narrow they wanted to define that. And they want it focused on the B of A site, but with some consideration given to the adjacent shopping center. So we'll go ahead and develop a scope of work, get a proposal from a consulting firm to undertake that study. Community engagement, that would obviously be coming before the commission for input as well as recommendation, but something that will kick off later this year. And then lastly, I'm sure you heard that the city did announce the hiring of a new city manager. So we're looking forward to his arrival at the end of June, Jeremy Dennis. And he does have, among his various hats he's worn professionally, he does have some planning, both education and professional background. So a little bit of a planning background in his history as well. So looking forward to that.
Great. Just curious, who owns that land where the B of A site is?
I'm sorry?
Who owns that land? Is
The
it
city
city?
acquired it.
Okay, thank you. Any items initiated by the commissioners?
Oh, I just want to add that I did sign up for that planning event at the end of the month. So anybody else want to join me, I'll be there.
Great. That's great. Otherwise, I believe we can adjourn this meeting to our to the next regular meeting scheduled May 23rd, 2024. Great. So adjourned.
About right.
Thank you.
For-
Good night. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.